had a few notes here, just kind of to get us kick-started. So the rules to this discussion are there are no rules, okay? There are no stupid ideas. There are no stupid questions. It is, as you saw, we had a good background today on treponema, on fuso. One of the things, if you want to get your guys in the hospital to wear rubber gloves, just tell them that the bug that causes hairy heel wart is the same thing that causes syphilis in humans. Both treponemas, they automatically put their gloves on, wash their hand before they eat lunch. We don't have a vaccine against it. There is no vaccine today against the treponema or the spirochetes. We learned quite a bit about the environment, right? And the impact that the environment can have. And we start looking at chemical versus physical, and we look at ammonia, and we look at water, and we look at things that are creating an anaerobic environment that allow these pathogens to thrive. We learned that treating sooner, I think everybody that spoke, the sooner, if you have it, the sooner you intervene, the better. What I thought was kind of amazing was this case fatality rate on lamenesses was about the same as what our case fatality rate is on respiratory disease. Probably the way the good Lord in Detroit designed immune responses and things to that nature. Sunlight, oxygen, and desiccation. I had to Google that word. It wasn't what I thought it was, Dr. Shane. I didn't know how we were going to keep the cattle from desiccating in the feedlot. But desiccation is keeping it dry, right? Kitty litter, something that we can keep the environment dry. As we look at water tanks, areas around water tanks, drainage, any place that I can tell you in the feed yards that I've had problems with hairy heel warts, not talking about barns, not talking about open front sheds, but outdoor pens, we could have the driest pen conditions, and if there's one mud hole and those cattle are dry, it is a slurry of all those bugs in there, and that's where we'll have the issues. I didn't even think about our hospital pen floors, right? As we're bringing these cattle in and we're treating them, and the worst managed pens in any feed yard tend to be the hospital pens, and we overcrowd them, right? Overcrowding in any pen creates more moisture, and so pen density, these types of things, and I think we need to take a look at. Dwight did a great job of tying it together, with the performance we see, but things that compromise skin integrity, opportunities for them to enter the skin, an environment that has low in oxygen that's providing the bugs a place to flourish. Risk factors, wet, muddy conditions, wet areas and pens, chemical and physical trauma. We see a lot of that with foot rot. Cattle go stand in a water hole, or we have muddy conditions with frozen conditions, the combinations of disrupting that integrity between the toes, things to that nature. But as I sat there and as we went through this, one of the things after we discussed all that, I'm sitting there going, Evan, didn't we have those same conditions in '84? Then why is it a problem now? And it wasn't then. As we add it all up. So what else are we missing? What else is out there that we need to be thinking about or could be contributing? And so, as we look at foot baths, as we look at interventions, as we look at copper sulfate and mud and things of that nature, focusing on integrity of the skin, immune function, hygiene, and pathogen control, what are some of the things that people in the audience have rolling around in their brain that wasn't mentioned today during our presentations?
Are you talking about '84? Didn't we have the treponema in the gut in '84? Hasn't that been around forever?
Since at least '74. It was mentioned that the dairies and the beef cattle that we recognized it, but we didn't have anything like. So I always go back to some of the simplistic things, and maybe what Dwight was saying, that the dairy being low on beef cattle, populating our yards with dairy cattle, things to that nature, maybe that track in. Bruce.
I mean, the thing that has changed is our genetic pool. Obviously, we've changed since '84. We have a different, I mean, do we know the difference between crossbreds? Have we looked at the Holstein cross? Or do we see difference in crossbred cattle versus straight cattle, things like that? That may have an impact on immunity and change on that. Because we see that, I think, in some other conditions, not just lameness.
Yeah, absolutely. Digestives and, yep, agreed.
How much difference
To follow up on that,
distillers products in?
The one question here was, hold on, Dr. Shane, the one question here was, how much difference is our manure makeup with byproduct feeds?
I was going to follow up on Bruce's comment, and I think one of the differences that we see that is just associated with days on feed. A lot of the other issues that we're seeing, AIPs, late-term deads, are associated with increased days on feed, or we're taking these things to bigger outweights. We know that we get maybe not exponential, but greater than linear increase in incidence in these cattle as they reach higher endpoints. And so I think part of why we see them now versus 1980 or 1970 is also the outweights we're taking them to.
Maybe it's two-parter, but what all do we know about the environmental concerns of spent foot bath stuff, and where that can go and how that affects us agronomically, I guess, for most of us? And then the second question would be, I forgot what it was. What did we say? Oh, as you try to dry out in deep bedded barns, as you try to dry that out, I know they do that with poultry litter, but I'm assuming because we're feeding wetter rations and water intake on 1,400 pound steers and some of that, that we have a different, at least moisture level, probably composition level in that litter. So are some of those same products that are utilized in poultry going to be usable for us, and do we have to go to crazy high levels so that creates more concern than what they're worth? That'd be some questions my entire table would have.
Okay, does anybody, go ahead.
Any correlation between nutrition and this?
The question comes back to, is there any correlation between nutrition and hairy heel wart as well? Any thoughts, comments? Yep.
It's kind of harder today with the technology we have on purpose. We have corn that has more starch than what it used to. We've got software that allows us to dial the dry matter into 1/10 of a pound, and we push them as hard as we can to get them out as fast as we can. And does that cause more subclinical or clinical acidosis challenges than we used to have in the past, when maybe we fed them with a bucket of silage versus how many pounds and whatnot there?
I think one of the things that as you mentioned that, one of the things that would be pretty simple to measure, maybe, would be fecal pH and what's going on in that pen floor, or some of the beef fecal pats that we could start monitoring that and seeing. I also wonder about urine pH. We can change that pretty dramatically with different feedstuffs as well. And if it's, I don't know that we're looking at some of those, but I think you're definitely right. How hard we push the cattle has changed significantly. Another one that I brought up, please don't run out because this product is not labeled for control, but a lot of yards don't feed Tylen. And we get into the yards that Shane's talking about, and that you can't find a yard that doesn't feed Tylosin. And I don't know if that has any control effect or not, but again, and the hard part is, Dwight, where's Dwight? The hard part is, like, Dorte's challenge model has nothing to do with, there's two ways to look at it, right? There's one way to look at what affects the foot, and the other one, what's in the gut or what affects the gut and carriage.
The other thing on the question on how hard we're feeding them, and I get that question a lot, is would we be better off if we had a little more roughage in the diet? Would we have less DD? Then I'll go back to look at a replacement dairy heifer diet. It's 90% roughage, and we still have a high prevalence rate there. So I'm not sure, if we get cause and effect there.
Saw a lot of open sores, but are we studying what happens after we go through a foot bath? And do we know what they look like? Do they actually heal some? Or, I have comments from guys that will say, the day after I run them through, you can see them walking better.
Yep. So the question is how well, we see the strawberry lesions on the back. How soon does it heal? You guys deal with foot baths. How it's pretty immediate or on the relief of pain?
A lot of that depends on the product. If you're using formaldehyde, the formaldehyde is desensitizing. So that's one of the reasons that the animals walk better almost immediately, because that formaldehyde kind of desensitizes those nerve endings that are causing the pain.
Pickles them.
Not necessarily pickles them, but yes. And using it, it was nice seeing those pictures of the chemical burns so that people can see that and notice it if they are using too much or their herd may be more sensitive than other herds, to be able to identify those burns, because those are something that you would have to stop running immediately and not run anything, because it's not going to, the bath, even if you change the product, it's not going to help those animals get better from those chemical burns, and they can be pretty serious.
These two gentlemen drove over from Wisconsin, where they run a foot bath consulting company, and they saw that we were having a meeting, and they know Bob, and so we're glad to have you here. A lot of expertise sitting there. Other questions or comments? Yep. Dr. Lowe.
So many of the things that the presenters covered today, this region does just incredibly well. As far as the way that they run foot baths and the concentrations, the veterinarians around here have done a phenomenal job getting everybody tuned into what to do. Dwight, your comment that like 1% of the treponeme species in the rumen are affected with hair heel wart. I think there's data showing like it could be 14%. I think that there's a little bit higher relationship there between what's in the oral cavity, what's in the recto-anal junction, what can be in the rumen itself. So I think that does play a pretty significant, it may play a significant role in what is transported through in the rumen into the environment that potentially could help cause this. But the way that this problem gets created is it's fascinating, because you get these, whether it's Dichelobacters that initiate it, that allow the treponemes to get in, but fusobacterium's involved, and mycoplasma. It's just this crazy deal. So it is confusing about where to go with it. Diet's related. There's a feed yard that had finishing cattle and replacement heifers at the same feed yard, and I'm sure there's other examples of this, and the dairy heifers didn't really have an issue, and the fat cattle did. So that says that there certainly could be a dietary component or a rumen insult component that allows this to be more prevalent. The Thailand comment, Dan, is really interesting, because that in some ways going to lessen the fusobacterium in the environment. And that is more of a persistent bacteria in the environment versus like a Dichelobacter, which dies off fast, I think. So that the fuso deal is real. I think there has to be something there. So I'm talking in a big circle here, but there's a wide array of reasons that we can't get this thing under control. Yet the guys that deal with it every day do a pretty darn good job keeping it at bay. But we can't get rid of it.
But
Yet.
I think you have a great point there, and that's, is there a different way to control it than just brute strength? Right? I mean, that's the way it feels like right now, right? If you're going to run all your cattle through the foot baths multiple days and just the insanity of, we don't have time to get other things done. And every time you're focused on, for me, it's kind of like when you're looking, we're training pen riders if we're having issues with pregnant heifers in the feed yard, all of a sudden they get to looking for pregnant heifers instead of bovine respiratory disease. And the next thing you know, we're not doing our daily due diligence on BRD, and we're focused on this other, and it takes our eye off the ball. We always said the more high-risk cattle you have in a feed yard, the higher risk your low-risk cattle become. And so how do we get to that point, and what are some things that we can start to figure out on this risk assessment? I've racked my brains just like y'all, reading dairy papers, reading different, but I think that the gut, I think that the environment, I think that, we're going to have to set up the multiple hurdles, but where do we start? Dr. Loy, do you have any words of wisdom?
I have no words of wisdom today.
Oh, bull. Yes.
So we've dealt with it for 10 years, and our first pen of cattle that we dealt with it in was in a brand new slap barn. So as far as, pen conditions and stuff, it was pretty dry in there. As far as the Thailand comment, we fed Holstein, so we have been a Thailand yard. I guess that says a lot there. We don't see that that's created an effect at all in what we've done. I do think there is something nutritionally, but I don't have a clue what it is. The comment about most of the conditions are in the back feet, and then dairy heifers, obviously, where are they urinating and where's that splash going? Is there something there compared to a steer on all feet? So I don't have any answers, just that we worked with Dorte. She's been to our place a lot. It helped us a lot in what we were doing foot bath wise and lowering concentrations and sanitation. We used to fit foot baths in when weather conditions let us not do something else, and that's not the time to be foot bathing when your alleys are wet, and different stuff. So dry conditions. We worked with Dwight quite a bit and stuff. We almost had a little more trouble this year on bringing cattle in from the west, just because of the dry conditions, that we had feet that were cracked from being so dry that it was maybe an entry point for it compared to, we always talk about wet conditions a lot, but we dealt with some of that too. So, and as far as strengthening the hoof, my thought always comes to, we see it in between the hoof in that soft tissue. So as we're trying to strengthen that hoof and build integrity, is that doing the same thing to the skin? Okay, so I always wondered about that as I'm trying to build this hoof, and then I'm having my problem in the soft tissue. So I don't have any answers, just dealt with it for 10 years, and it's not a lot of fun, especially when your first comment of it is in January and you need to do a foot bath in this part of the world. Yeah. That's a sinking feeling of how in the world is that ever going to happen. So, building a foot bath that works well is about the only thing that's saved us. So,
do you feel like you can control it with the foot baths, or?
Yeah. So our deal has changed a lot. We fed a lot of Holsteins. That was our deal. All confinement barns, Holsteins. And we'd bring a 350-pound Holstein in to finish. So you've got them around for 400 plus days. I think duration has a lot to do with it, in my opinion. Now we've changed, labor is an issue for all of people. So we've changed stuff around. We do still have some Holsteins, but they have always come out of the Southwest mostly. So they spend time at a Texas Panhandle yard until they're a heavier weight to come up. The few that we do deal with, we just have seen a reduction dramatically in the incidence of them when they don't come into our yard as a light weight animal. Same thing on what we're doing in the beef cattle world now. We don't bring any calves in anymore. They're all yearlings. And we see, on a 180-day period, a very low reduction in doing it. We've changed some things, but the incidence of that animal being on your yard for a long time, to me, just seemed to raise the bar.
When do days on feed, when do people typically see lesions? What is there a pattern? Is it, first 30 days, 120 days?
120, 30.
120, 130? 120, 130?
We keep seeing it earlier and earlier. I mean, we're seeing it in 8-weight heifers. I mean, they're coming in and they got it. I think it's a problem that people that don't have it, they have no idea what you're looking for. And then the guys that get them are stuck with them. Or stuck with the problem.
Definitely invaded the background lot area where we pull cattle from west of here.
We see more and more cattle coming in from background yards that within 30 or 50 days we're seeing issues. So if it's a 100-day incubation period, it's coming into our yards. I raise the question, is the treponema viable over such a wide range of environments that there's no way to change the environment? I mean, pH, temperature, are they so viable that they can live from a pH of 3 to 8 and temperatures from 50 to 150, or,
Actually, probably one of the best people that I know of is fecal pH and survivability of the lower the pH of the feces, usually the less the survival of these type of pathogens that we're talking about, especially fuso. And so, and you look at the fecal pat, and obviously in a slat we don't have a fecal pat, but I start to wonder about pit fans and different things like that of what might come up. I don't know if that would be irritable to the skin, but then you'd think it'd be more irritable to the nose first, and you'd see respiratory issues. But the fecal pH to me is something in our outdoor lots. But I kind of go along with some of the things in outdoor lots too. With Shane, is we get those cattle that get bad habits of splashing water all over, or if we put 2 water tanks together so that we can increase water tank space for the cattle, and next thing you know, we've got a constant mud hole. Those are some other things, but I think that we're going to have to sit down from this meeting, take ideas that we have. What can we do in the environment? What can we do in the gut? What can we do in the transport of animals? What about trucks? Do we clean out all the trucks? Has anybody ever gone through and sampled trucks as the cattle are transported? If you look at what they're doing to control it in chickens, as Terry mentioned the bedding, and obviously, maybe there's something to bedding them in trucks. Maybe the breakdown or something that's happened before they get to us. I don't know, but we're seeing it in 8-weight, 7 and 8-weight. And what just drives me crazy, does anybody have an idea of why you have none of it? And then all of a sudden this pin just breaks and none of the other pins break. And then a week or two later, the next pin breaks, but it's not it's you know, you got 30 other pins and no other. That's the reason why I started getting into the intermittent shedding and thinking of just like what we have with yonis and other bugs that are in the gut. If you get a, you know, slug of feed or something that disrupts. T.G. Nagaraja also thinks that the fusobacterium that are causing us problem with liver abscesses, which I'll throw treponema in there as well, not so much with liver abscesses, he thinks that they're actually the ones that are burrowing into the lining of the rumen that are released when we have an acidosis type upset, because he says it's hard to find in these low pH rumens, it's hard to find a lot of fuso. So it's I think we're gonna learn a lot.
One of the things we've found in we feed changed to dairy calves, but it works with everything. We temperature every animal as we unload them, and that has been the biggest plus for our operation that we've made. And when you're talking about trucks and that, we happen to be involved in a lot of hogs, and there ain't a hog truck ever comes on the place or leaves the place without being washed.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of this is environmental management, but I forget who it was this morning said there's three kinds of cattle, one that doesn't ever get DD, one that gets it for a little while, and one that has it all the time. I think we've got to look at it from that standpoint too, whether that's a genetic thing or breed thing or whatever. But and again, just observation without looking at every foot in the pen, it seems like you got a major problem, but it's only 5% of the calves have it, and the other 95 don't seem to have it. And if it's as contagious as it seems to be, or we're told that it is, why don't 95% or 98% of the cattle in the pen get it? And maybe they do, and it's just not bad enough. We don't see them limping, so we don't pick up a foot and look at it either.
That's true.
Is that what folks see? That 5 to 10% of the cattle are infected, the rest are not? Or is it a larger percentage? In your 10 years of experience, would you see 50% of the calves who would have a hairy heel wart incidence in a pen, or it would be a smaller amount?
5% limp, yeah. We don't know what the rest of it.
Right.
Exactly.
So if after thinking about it and listening today, what would be areas of priority or thoughts of priority or things that we should, obviously one of the things I'm going to do from after today for the group and for everybody that registered, because we have contact information, is I'll put together kind of a white paper of what we discussed and the ideas that were brought up here during this discussion, so that we can keep it all together. The one thing I hate is when we leave these types of meetings and there's no resolution or there's no follow through. And so let's put this together so we can keep tracking forward and not take a step backwards as a team. But
You might mention there is funding to go forward.
there is funding with the Iowa Beef Industry Council from the state voluntary checkoff. There is money to do this research, to follow up, and maybe it's to something of changing some practices. Maybe there's a cost of changing some practices on someone's farm and they want to try it and they want the cost offset. Let's write it up in a proposal. Those are the kinds of things we really start to learn from. And so if there's something that you've been sitting there going, well, you know, I'd like to try something to that nature, then we can, there's no limits. Well, there are financial limits, but there's a lot of different things that we can do and that's exactly why we did the voluntary checkoff, was for a meeting like today but also then to follow up and let's see if we can do something to learn and fix problem. If somebody, I have one person that resorted to just, they're cleaning their bed pack barn every week. And yeah, I mean, it's just, but the cost. I have some feed yard managers that have it down to the penny per head per pound of bedding, you know? And so that's something that we have to offset the cost. What's the value of some of that? But unless we start to try it and try some things, we're not going to move it forward.
How do you see it progressing? I mean, is it, think you'll be able to find a way in which it's originated, or just start? You said we don't know if it starts through a crack in the skin or the gut, or.
I think the answer to it is going to be all the above, right? This is no less frustrating than what bovine respiratory disease is. It's multi-bugs, it's multi-causes, it's environmental, it's, you know, and we have about the same case fatality rate. You know, I think you could throw mastitis in there. Any sort of disease on a mucosal surface, we're going to have, you know, calf scours. Just think of it in that terms, and now we have to start thinking about how we have to go about working together to manage it. I don't think there'll be one answer, that's for sure.
Has it showed up maybe in sheep, like sheep and all?
There's a dysentery in hogs that's caused by treponema. There's also one in poultry that causes some feed issues. And so digging through some of theirs, I think that's why Engelken brought up some of the different treated bedding type stuff that they've done in poultry. But it's such a different thing. It's like, okay, we're running the Iowa Cattlemen's Association Carcass Challenge or Carcass Futurity. We're going to take 75 cattle from different operations in the state and throw them in a pen and feed them. And I said, how many hog guys would do that? You know, they'd have a heart attack. They can't. I mean, and chicken guys are worse. You know, and so it's a completely different system that we're dealing with. You know, who knows about different sale barns? And if they're infected with, how often do they clean out? The trucks, how often do they clean out? You know, all these things before we get them, but that I've always thought about it has to be a problem right here until today when everybody started talking, and maybe we need to do some surveys of pen floors of sale barns. Maybe we need to do some surveys of pen floors of trucks as they come in or leave the feed yards. We probably need to be putting together some epidemiology within operations that are having issues with hairy heel wart. Let's figure out classes of cattle, days on feed. Let's start to nail this down and do our homework. And I'll put this in the white paper on things that we can do, but let's start getting clinically, let's get a good diagnosis and start hammering on it.
Most everybody here runs foot baths. And it's been mentioned many times today, you know, run a foot bath every 3 to 4 weeks. So that's common. So unfortunately, that might lead to all of us thinking that that's the right thing to do. That may or may not be the right thing to do. More might not be better. More, you know, running cattle 3 times in a row. I don't know if that's great. So since we have the gentleman from Wisconsin that have done the foot bath consulting, can you shed some light on how we should be running foot baths?
First of all, he's going to charge us, all right?
And
so I'm going to start the clock. You start to.
That was a comment prior to this discussion is teach us how to better utilize foot baths. So let's have this conversation.
So as most of my experience is in dairy herds versus beef, but I do work with a number of beef herds in Wisconsin. I have seen better results out of consecutive days versus one day. Whether, and it's a loaded question, how many cows can go through a bath, or how often do I run it? Because every farm is going to be different. What's going to work on your farm? Typically 2 days. Heifers and dry cows are not too much different than running beef. Not as big a numbers as you guys, but it's similar stress levels on the animals. But typically 2 days in a row are going to work better, and the frequency is going to be what you're going to see results in. Sometimes it's, when I get into a new herd, I'll suggest running it heavier at first, kind of like taking care of a pool, shock it, and then maintain it, and back down to, every other week, every 3 weeks. But try to build up a pattern, some data for yourself to figure out what's going to work best for your herd. Is that
5% solution?
I
have guys trending toward 8 to 10%. No.
So you'll go to the hospital.
I don't like it.
Anything over 3 gallons, 50 gallons, you've got potential burning yourself.
But what we might be talking different is 10% formula or 10% formaldehyde. We use those words interchangeably or not.
Right, formaldehyde, I would never go any higher than a 5% solution. 3 gallons to a 50-gallon bath. I know your baths are much larger than that. I work with cows. I can't do math. So,
It's still based on the same amount of numbers.
yeah, I mean, that ratio.
It's just, if you're looking at 200 gallons to 500 gallons, it's still close.
So you guys are recommending 5% formaldehyde proper, not 5% of a 36% formaldehyde solution. Is that the formula?
So the typical
1.8% formaldehyde proper if it's 5% formula.
The typical formaldehyde solution that I'm familiar with is a 3711, which falls into that 36.8, I think is the C of A on it. I would 3 gallons of formaldehyde to 50 gallons of water. You'll have to figure the ratio out because, like I said, I can't do that in my head. And I have a cheat sheet, but not with me.
So there was a slide that was up here earlier, but I didn't comment on it then. On a concrete bath, anything with ledges, or if you have a tunnel, you want to create a tunnel. So we hang plywood on baths to create a tunnel. If you are having issues on the back feet, they could be sidestepping a bath. We see it with dairy cattle, sometimes with beef, but they will sidestep a bath. So you want to create the tunnel and create, if there's a ledge to step on.
Do you see in dairy cattle, because I agree that I see more lesions on the back feet.
On dairy cattle, yes, because cows can perch though. Cows can perch in free stalls, dairy cattle can. Beef cattle might not have that luxury. They might have the luxury of doing that next to a drinker, but dairy cattle, if they will, if front feet hurt or something like that, they can perch, or if they can't get into the stall,
said
they'll
perch. I thought you
Perch.
said purge. And I'm like,
Perch,
oh,
no.
shit.
So back feet might be in manure more often than fronts. But if we see it in back feet, we may see it in the fact that
No,
if it's
we'll
a
see it
shorter
because
bath-
cattle will curl when they lay down. They curl their front feet back, and they're the tipped up versus the back feet are laying in the manure.
Yep. It's a similar concept because
Never thought of it.
where we don't see it in the front feet, they're either eating, it's gonna be dry or up by the bunk, or like Chad said, they're gonna be perched in the stall. So I mean, ideally, they're up to eat, they're up to drink, and they're laying down. Those are the things that the dairy cattle are doing. So the front feet are going to see less, and that makes perfect sense what you said about them laying down, because you're right, their front feet are always curled up underneath them, and the back feet are laying in somebody else's.
Challenge I have for the vets in the room, and being that I'm dairy structured more than beef, you guys comment about how one pen can get it and then the next. I'd be interested to see is, does it have something to do with fly bites? Could it be fly transfer from one pen to the other? I know it's going to be hard to track, but because I know they did that in the study where they actually created a wart, but you did it with moisture. Could you do the same thing with a fly bite? By that fly biting the back of that heel in that soft tissue, could that be transfer? Which I know is difficult to control. You could maybe control partially ventilation, but I don't think you guys are all going to want to put piles of fans in your beef barns. But flies are a problem in dairy industry, and they're also a problem in beef. So.
Oh yeah, they're a major issue.
Have a question over here or a chat question? No? Oh. Okay.
Oh.
Did we have a chat question earlier? Did you have one?
We're going to have a long white paper. I'm pretty good at. What else are we missing? Thoughts, comments. This is some pretty good stuff. Things that.
Dr. Dan, one of the questions that came in online, they were wondering what's the probability of transfer of an animal getting hairy heel wart if they've come from a clean, dry environment?
Ask the white.
As compared to wet, a wet environment.
Well, clean feet, better.
Clean, dry environment.
If they're coming from a clean, dry environment and entering a clean, dry environment, I'd say that the opportunity to transfer would be relatively low.
And I hadn't thought about the calves coming in, though, from a drought-stricken area that have cracked skin. We've that could be a issue. Shane, do you have anything to add?
No, I'd piggyback on Dwight's comment. I think relatively, if they're coming in with pretty good skin integrity and dry, even if there's some maybe dry cracked hooves and those kind of things, I think if the interdigital space is pretty good and in pretty good hygiene and coming into a dry environment, we certainly see the lesions on feeder cattle in western Nebraska, western Kansas, and cattle that have had lesions, and you can see those lesions on those cattle. You can see the dimple kind of in that rear interdigital space that none of those cattle ever become clinical. So even if that has existed and they have the lesion there, that for those that become clinically lame, we really have to see those wet environment in one place or the other.
And he talked about the western calves, the cracked feet or from drought area, and you kind of touched on source of sail burn and different stuff. In my case, I see cattle from all over. I haven't dealt with hairy heel warts a lot. I'm from a little ways south of here versus most of you guys probably. I see it from certain cattle coming from a certain background yard, and it's consistently with those cattle. So with more discussion over the last year and just talking to different people, I feel like maybe they're coming in with it, and that might be something like your case. And then I seen it in one other set of cattle, and they're from extreme northern North Dakota last year, and we know they were extremely dry up there. And Hereford influence heifers, there's another problem in itself. But so I don't know, maybe there's a lot more to the source of the cattle, and if they're coming in with a problem or they get at your yard.
if they're coming in, I mean, like those North Dakota cattle, I mean, in the drought deal, we had a lot of people, as far as obviously feed stuff's changed, mineral intake, all that stuff changed. So, I mean, that opens the door to what imbalances the integrity of whether the immune system and or in the skin, right? I mean, so that changes.
I think the other thing to think about on some of those Western feeder cattle is in those drought, times of drought, are they congregating at dams? Are they congregating around water tanks? I mean, their normal habits are different, but even though they're coming from dry environments, their local environment that they're spending most of their time in might be the one place with water.
Yeah, I never, when we were working with feed yards in Arizona, you know, they'd say summertime was the foot rot season, which would be the opposite of what we would think around here. We'd be thinking fall and those kinds of conditions, but the reason why they said it was foot rot season was because of the shade and the cattle getting up underneath the shades and creating that urine environment and that. So even out west, they could be creating that. Well, we're going to stay on time. Beth, you got one? All right, Beth. Go ahead. Don't forget to sign up if you have people that want to come down to the Feedlot Short Course. We've done it for 6 years, and love to have you come down and participate.
A question came in, are there reports from hairy heel wart in cows and cow herds in the West, or is it only the feedlot confined areas?
I think from the people that have discussed this, the most part of it is confined areas at this time is the bigger concern. And, you know, never say never, but that seems to be the bigger issues.
I'll follow up with that on Dr. Dan. I've certainly received calls from practitioners and producers throughout the country that have discovered hairy heel wart issues. I don't know that it's a large problem, but again, I've seen it in feeder cattle, cow-calf operations in areas that I wouldn't expect it. I do believe that the incidence in feedlot increased, but our awareness has also increased. And I think as awareness grows in some of these cow-calf areas, we'll probably find more. And so I think that's a tough balance, because I don't think the awareness in the cow-calf world's necessarily as high as it is, and so it's really hard to understand the true prevalence of it.
Another question, has anyone done serial biopsies to see if we can identify spirochetes before cattle show clinical signs? I realize you don't want to compromise skin integrity, but any other way to check?
No, I think that would be none that I know of on arrival.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you mentioned trucks and sale barns. Has anyone done environmental surveillance, like even in the dairy, outside of the animal production facility proper? Do we know?
Not that I'm aware of.
Where it exists, and so.
There are some papers on environment within the operation, but I haven't seen any that show it outside in our supporting systems for the industry. And I know, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus because my house isn't the cleanest all the time either, but there are some places that market cattle that don't clean the pens all that often. I started doing surveys of our sale barns before we would buy cattle, because I wanted to give a list of ranking auction markets to our cattle procurement team in my former life. And so I started during the slow season going and visiting and grading them. And I called up to our cattle procurement guys and said, don't buy from this auction market. They're taking in cattle on Friday for a Monday sale. There's no feed, no water in the pens. And those guys said, can you imagine the weigh-ups we get on those cattle? I'm like, God, it just backfired on me, you know? They bought them all. So not always are we looking to do things that support health. And I commend our Iowa producers because this is one of the first meetings I've gotten to go to that we are changing management decisions. We're changing nutrition. We're looking for ways to improve some health parameters. Usually in the last 20 years, as I went through looking at, as we start to hear people talk about late day deads and different things to that nature, when I looked at all the things that we've changed over the last 2 decades, almost all of those changes have been in favor of production efficiency and feed efficiency without the impact on health. And so today we'll come together and we'll start to bring all of this together. But any other comments, Rex?
Yeah, another thing too, I know there's a Landco rep in here, a Merck rep in here. I know there's lots of feed representatives in here too. And so it's your customers admire that. I admire that you came to the meeting today to try to help them get better on their farms. And so we just appreciate that.
Yep, thank you very much. And we're going to stay on time. It's 3:24. We were going to adjourn at 3:30. And nobody ever complained about getting out of class a little early. So look for white paper. Thank you for attending. Thank you for your ideas. Hopefully, we'll start to move the ball down the field.